We're going to pick back up in Genesis chapter 12, where we left off last week. We kind of ended up in chapter 11 with learning about Terah's family, and Abram and Sarai were mentioned. And this chapter 12 is going to kind of start Abram's story. Abram, whose name will later be changed to Abraham, his story is pretty straightforward, so let's get into it. So Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. So God's telling Abram to leave his home country and go, and the Lord will kind of guide him where he needs to be. Verse 2. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. God's promised him that if he does what he's told, does the word of God, God will bless him and he will be a blessing. Verse 3. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. This is God kind of foretelling, as we've seen in Jesus' lineage from that study, through Abram's descendants he will be born. That's Jesus Christ. God is making a covenant with Abram and his descendants that they will be blessed. Verse 4. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old, so he was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. So Abram did what the Lord told him to do. He left his homeland, and Lot, which was his nephew, it was his brother's son, kind of followed with him. Verse 5. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, so his wife and his nephew, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. So once again, Abram, his wife, Lot, his nephew, all the goods they needed, livestock, food, etc. Also the people that were in Haran that kind of were followers of them. Lot had his followers and Abram had his followers. And they went into the land of Canaan. Keep in mind here, although they were Kenites intermixed in the land of Canaan, that Canaanites, as we will see mentioned, were the native ones, like the ones that dwelt in the land of Canaan. That's the difference in your Kenites and Canaanites. And Canaan, that land meaning lowland, country west of Jordan and the Dead Sea. Pick back up on verse 6. And Abram passed through the land into the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was in the land. Once again, that Canaanite being the native or the dwellers, the people that were already in the land of Canaan. Remember, God told him to go, and he would lead him as to where to be. Verse 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. So Abram and Sarai, keep in mind, Abram was 75 years old, and Sarai was around 65 years old, and they didn't bear any children. So God's telling Abram that he's going to bless this land unto his seed. Well, they're 75, 65 years old. They don't have children yet. So that's that covenant coming to pass. It's kind of odd, being 75 years old with no children, hearing, hey, your seed's going to be blessed. Well, what seed? Well, we'll see. So verse 8. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Hai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. So they kind of quick settled in between these two lands, and he built another altar, and Abram called upon God for guidance. We're going to see here all through Abram's story, he always, before he goes to his next step, so to speak, he always calls upon the Lord for that guidance. So verse 9. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. So he continued his journey. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. This land that they came to, there was a big famine there. They obviously couldn't have stayed settled here long. So let's kind of see where God takes them. Verse 11. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. So remember here, Sarai is around 65 years old. Abram is stating that she's a very beautiful woman. So easy on the eyes, so to speak. But not saying a 65-year-old woman couldn't be beautiful, but remember, back in this time, they didn't have the pollutants and the man-made chemicals like we do today. Picking up at verse 12. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. I'm going to be quoting Pastor Murray here. We are to be as peaceful as a dove, but wiser than a serpent. Abram kind of knows that he's wise enough to know that if they enter into Egypt as husband and wife, that there's a lot of greed and corruption that's in this land at this time. So he knows that they're going to see Sarai and say, wow, she's beautiful. I need to take her to wife. Well, that's her husband. Let's take him out so we can. He's kind of already knows how this is going to play out. Verse 13. This is Abram speaking to Sarai. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. So he's telling Sarai, look, when we go in here, let people know that, tell people that we're brother and sister, because if not, they're going to kill me out of greed and lust, basically. So something very important to remember here, they won't be lying. So Abram and Sarai were brother and sister. Okay, they were half brother and sister. They had the same father, but two different mothers. And it's important to understand, at this point in time, there was no, I guess, sin upon incest. That's the first thing that comes to mind, isn't this incest? Looking back at James's lesson, we know there's a law against uncovering your father's nakedness, but sometimes this sort of thing was necessary for replenishing the earth and keeping that pure bloodline. So I want to go, just to show you here, I want to go to Genesis chapter 20, verses 11 through 13. Keep in mind, Abram and Sarai were both chosen by God. It's not for us to question God's plan, because through this lineage, Christ would be born. So Genesis chapter 20, verses 12 and 13. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, this is Abram, that I said unto her, This is thy kindness which thou shalt show unto me. Verse 12, And yet indeed she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. So they were half brother, half sister, and she became my wife. This is Abram and Sarai. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, This is thy kindness which thou shalt show unto me. At every place whither we shall come, say of me, He is my brother. So once again, Abram's wise enough through God's guidance to kind of understand, look, you're a beautiful woman. There's a lot of sin, grief, sin and lust, that they're going to take me out. So we need to tell these places that we're brother and sister. They're not lying. We can go back to Genesis chapter 12, pick back up on verse 14. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, that Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. So what Abram had kind of predicted was true. They went into Egypt, and the people of Egypt kind of paid Sarah's beauty attention. Like I said, he was wise through God's word. He kind of knew what was going to happen. Verse 15. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh is the name in which they use commonly to describe like the native kings of Egypt at the time. So they're kind of bringing her into the king's house, or the king's house, so to speak. So verse 16. And he entreated Abram well for her sake. So he's also taken up Sarai's family at the time, trying to kind of butter her up. And he entreated Abram well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen and he-asses and manservants and maidservants, she-asses and camels. So they took real good care of Abram, so to speak, because he was Sarai's brother. So, like I said, Abram kind of predicted how this was going to play out. Verse 17. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house. So what we're seeing here is that divine intervention taking place. The Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Abram and Sarai were kind of doing the Lord's work, doing all they could do. When it was out of their hands, God stepped in with that divine intervention. Verse 18. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? So Pharaoh's found out now that Sarai is Abram's wife. We obviously know why he didn't tell him that. Verse 19. Why sayest thou, she is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold, thy wife, take her, go thy way. So he's sending them on their way. So God stepped in, caused this plague over Pharaoh and all his followers. So now Pharaoh's just go. He wants this plague to be over. Verse 20. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. So Pharaoh had all of his men kind of pack them up, go, get out of here. Chapter 13 here, we're going to see a dividing take place. So once again, they came out of Egypt. They're kind of going back to their quick settled place, so to speak. Genesis chapter 13, verse 1. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. So all that company we seen earlier in chapter 12, they're back. Verse 2. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. So Abram had a lot of assets. He was very, very wealthy. Verse 3. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai. So they're kind of back at that quick settle that we seen. Verse 4. Unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and where Abram called on the name of the Lord. Once again, we see Abram calling upon the Lord. Where do I need to go next, Lord? He's never taken his journey in his own hands. He's letting God guide him through this whole process. And that altar there, a way we can kind of look at that in our day and time is kind of like a prayer room. Look at it that way, a place where he can kind of go, meditate, talk to the Lord, kind of do what he needs to do. Verse 5. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. So Abram kind of had his assets, so to speak, all of his cattle, dwellings, his followers, but so did Lot. So this was a pretty big company. Verse 6. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. So there were so many people, animals in this land, and this land didn't have enough resources to sustain this many people. So what are they going to do? Obviously, they're going to have to find something else. Verse 7. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. So not only is there this big company in this land, but also the natives of this land. And now they're having such a shortage of natural resources, you're starting to see strife and bickering between the two, kind of fighting over the natural resources. I mean, even the natives are kind of getting involved at this point. Verse 8. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. Abram saying, look, we're family here, we got to figure something out. There's no need. We got all this land to go on. Let's kind of work this out between ourselves. There's no reason to fight over this. Verse 9. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Abram's telling Lot, look, all this land, you get first pick. You go this way, me and my people will go the opposite way, vice versa. We just got to fix this strife going on here. There's plenty of land. Verse 10. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. Lot looks each side's here. He looks upon Jordan. Plenty of water, plenty of natural resources, beautiful to the eye, so to speak. So he's getting first pick. This other side is more of like a deserty area. So kind of see, obviously, you get first pick, which side you going to pick? The one that's more beautiful, pleasing to the eye. Verse 11. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. So Lot chose the east side over Jordan, where Sodom and Gomorrah were, and they separated. So this big party, Lot had his followers, Abram had his. Verse 12. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. Now, kind of reading past this, we all know what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. We had a lesson on it a couple months ago, so we can kind of foresee how this is going to play out here. Verse 13. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So Sodom and Gomorrah was a part of this land of Jordan, but the men here were wicked exceedingly. It's full of sin and greed, and though it was beautiful to the eye, deeper down, it was a corrupt place. So Lot, just looking, was thinking, I'm going to take the better place, where long term, it wasn't the better place. That's something we can kind of look at today. Don't follow what you see. Don't follow the physical beauty. Kind of let God guide you to where you need to be. Take His word into guidance, just like Abram does here. Before he does anything, he asks God for that guidance. Your eyes, human eyes, our eyes, can be very, very deceiving. Verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. Look all around you. What God's telling Abram. Verse 15. For all the land which thou seest to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. So forever. God's telling Abram, your seed, all this land will be y'all's forever. Verse 16. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. So Abram and Sarai, 75, 65 years old, God's telling them, I'm going to make your seed like the dust of the earth. You can't count. Go to the beach. Try to count the sand. impossible. So that that just kind of shows God's blessing. It's kind of unfathomable for us to imagine a 75-year-old getting told your seed's going to be bountiful compared to the dust of the earth. Crazy to think about. Verse 17, arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Verse 18, then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the land of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Mamre meaning strength and fatness. So God was kind of telling him where to settle at this point, and the meaning of the name literally was strength and fatness. So God's blessing Abram with all the land around him. We're going to see here, picking up at Genesis chapter 14, Lot's settled in this beautiful but corrupt area, and he ends up getting captured, and they're going to have to figure something out, try to rescue him. So let's pick up here in chapter 14. Picking up here, I want to say this. You're going to see a lot of foreign names and a lot of foreign places. Like James talked about in our last lesson, don't beat yourself up trying to memorize all of these. Know where to find them. Important to study the areas, but let's just know where to find these things for now. And bear with me on pronunciation as well. Chapter 14, verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Eleazar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. Verse 2, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemibber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. So we're going to see this great war take place here. Verse 3, all these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. So I didn't make a slide for this, but I kind of want to, just for reference of where this is going to take place, I want to read in the Smith Bible Dictionary the definition of Siddim, the place. So what it says here is Siddim, field or plain. It was one of that class of valleys which the Hebrews designated by the word Emek. This term appears to have been assigned to a broad, flattish tract, sometimes of considerable width, enclosed on each side by definite spots, kind of like a valley, for the combat between the 4 and 5 kings, which is this story here. In this valley, the kings of the 5 allied cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela seem to have awaited the approach of the invaders. So it's a battlefield. It's just a flat plain, kind of like a valley. It's kind of enclosed like a bowl. So just wanted to kind of give you a visual of where all this was taking place. Verse 4. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer the king, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims, and the Ashtaroth, Carnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emans in Shaveh, Kiriathaim. Verse 6. And the Horites in their Mount Seir unto Elparan, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to in Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazezonatamir. Bear with me there. Verse 8. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar. and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim. So they joined these people in this bowl, this battlefield. Verse 9. With Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elazar, 4 kings with 5. So this 4 kings here, 4 kings with 5, meaning one of those, there were 5 kings, one of them was kind of like a lesser king, so that's why it's compared that way. So 5 kings and 5 armies together. Verse 10. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. We learned what that slime was back in James' lesson, like a tarry, earthy substance, pretty nasty place. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountains. So they kind of went to battle and got taken out. The ones that didn't just fled to the mountains. Verse 11. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. So they wiped Sodom and Gomorrah clean, not just from the people, but took all their goods too. Verse 12. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So they captured Lot and all his goods and his people, and they left. So he was kind of taken prisoner, so to speak. Verse 13. And there came one that had escaped, and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So these people were kind of allied with Abram, so to speak. So one of these prisoners that were captured escaped and was talking to Abram, saying, look, this is what's going on. We kind of need some help here. Verse 14. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, brother meaning brethren, we know it was his nephew, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Something I want to look at here. There's 5 armies, 5 kings with their armies, and Abram puts together 318 men. So 318 warriors against 5 armies. I want to look at the biblical numerics here. So 3 meaning resurrection, signature of God. So God, he's using God's guidance for this. 100 meaning God's election of grace. And then 18 meaning bondage. So this 318 warriors were literally written in the number to, through God's guidance, get Lot and his people out of bondage. So something to look at here. It was God written it in, literally in how many people they had for what was going to take place. So verse 15. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So Abram went after these 5 kings' armies by night. He was being very strategic. Obviously, looking at his past, he's using God's guidance for this. So 318 men going against 5 different armies, you got to be kind of wise to do this. So he knew that these people were going to be most likely drunk and partying, their most vulnerable time at night. So he drove them all the way to the far side of Damascus with 318 men. Verse 16. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. So once again, these 318 men not only pushed 5 armies on the far side of Damascus, pushed them out this land, but they also managed to save Lot and all his goods and people once again. So seeing that, you can tell God was in control here. He kind of guided this army, this 318 men, to be able to do so. Gave them the knowledge and the power to do so. Verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Sheva, which is the king's dale. So we kind of seen the king of Sodom kind of wimp out, so to speak. Now that they have victory, he's coming back like, oh, hey, hey, trying to get in on the action, so to speak. Verse 18. I want to keep in mind here, we're going to see a name that we've seen before, but we really need to pay attention here. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, Salem meaning peace, brought forth bread and wine, and was the priest of the Most High God. So we talked a little bit a while back about Melchizedek. Brought forth bread and wine. What is bread and wine symbolic for? Body of Christ and the blood that was shed, right? So he was the priest of the Most High God, the king of Salem, Salem meaning peace. Verse 19. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. So this king of Salem, this high priest, is blessing Abram, saying, you're a man of God. You're following God's word, and it's obviously coming to pass, So let's kind of learn about Melchizedek here. So Melcha meaning king, Zadok meaning the just or the upright, the righteous. So king of the upright. Who does that sound like? Jesus Christ, right? I want to flip over to Hebrews. We're going to read through chapter 6, starting at verse 20. And we're going to kind of dig a little deeper and learn more about this Melchizedek. A lot of people have a lot of confusion over him, but it's written by word. We're going to see here. So Hebrews chapter 6. We're going to start at verse 20. So Hebrew chapter 6, verse 20. Whither the forerunner is for us entered, even Jesus made an high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So here we're seeing this is Paul speaking, comparing Jesus to Melchizedek. So what was Jesus? He was an extension, and I think James touched on this. He was an extension or another role of God, same as Melchizedek. He was without father, without mother. He wasn't descended. So they're both these roles of God. And James used the analogy before, like Papa was a grandfather. He's a grandfather, a dad, soldier, a pastor. Same person, just different roles. We'll see here Jesus and Melchizedek were just different extensions of God. Chapter 7, verse 1 here. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all. So Abraham tithed to him, same thing we do with God, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace. Well, once again, Melchizedek being king of Salem, who was the king of peace? Jesus Christ. They were the same. I want to flip over now to John chapter 8, or flip back, so to speak, to John chapter 8. Just want to show another reference here. John chapter 8, we're going to pick up at verse 56. So John chapter 8, verse 56. This is written in red in mine if you have a... This is Jesus Christ himself talking here to the Jews. So John chapter 8, verse 56 reads, this is Jesus speaking. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Now hold on. Abraham was way back in the Old Testament. This is way in the New Testament now. Let's keep reading. Verse 57, then said the Jews unto him, so they're speaking back to Christ now, thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? Abraham isn't around at this time, okay? So they're saying, Jesus, you're not even 50 years old yet. How in the world did you know Abraham? You witnessed him. Verse 58 here explains it all. Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. Jesus is telling them straightforward. Before Abraham was, I am. Melchizedek, that king of Salem, that was me. I remember that. That was me. Melchizedek and Jesus were the same. They're both that extension of God. So we can flip back to Genesis chapter 14. Close up here. Back to Genesis chapter 14, verse 20. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand, and gave him tithes of all. So Abraham, after he had this huge success, he knew that it was through God's will and guidance that this happened, so he tithed to him. Verse 21. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons, and take the goods for thyself. So he wasn't even a part of this war, the king of Sodom at this time, so why should he even deserve anything at all, right? Verse 22. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. So once again, they just took over these 5 different armies, and what is Abram doing? He's giving all the glory to God. He's giving him the credit for it, because he knows that's how they were able to overcome this. Verse 23. That I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet. So our day's time, a thread off your shoelace. I don't even want that. I don't even want a string off your shoelace. And that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. So Abram's telling the king of Sodom to his face, look, I don't want none of this. I'm already kind of a wealthy man. I got what I need. You know, if I take something from you, I know you're corrupt enough. You're going to go around and be telling people, look, see how wealthy he is? That was me. See, Abram knows that his wealth come from God. He doesn't even want there to be a gray area there with the king of Sodom. So verse 24, to kind of wrap it up here. Save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. So Abram told him, look, all the men that were kind of with me in battle, let them take what they need. I'm good. God's blessed me. I've got all I need. I'm wealthy. I don't really need anything. So that's what came to pass. So something I want to take from this lesson here, going through Abram's story, is kind of use Abram as a role model in your life, right? So be strong in your faith. Don't just believe, but know that God will be with you and guide you through your life. Put in the works. Do the best you can possible through the eyes of the Lord. And if you're doing all you can do and divine intervention is necessary, God will make it happen. He will step in. But last but not least, always give God the glory, the honor, and the remembrance, because it is well deserved. Without him, we would have nothing. But looking at Abram's story, this kind of shows us that we're always going to have opportunity and trials and tribulations, but no lesson in this Bible is an easy path. We're going to read that. We're going to see that. So It's important that we know that God will always help lead, guide, and overcome these obstacles, and we will be blessed from it. We see firsthand reference in Abram's story. So it's important that we remember that. It's not going to be an easy path, but we're going to go through trial and tribulation, but God's going to bless us as long as we do what He has us to do, preach His word.